There are 470 sections in the Companies Act. We can give you one section, Section 135, as it turned out to be. And can you condense all of that that's been written there into, say, 120 or 130 words? So 30, 40 pages of guidelines into just that one section. Because of that window of opportunity, we were in the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs able to frame a section, send it for legal vetting, give it to the Corporate Affairs Ministry, and finally it became part of the 2013 Act.
Hello everyone, we have today with us Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee, CEO, Anil Agarwal Foundation, Vedanata Group, to share his insights on the current landscape and evolving concept of ESG and CSR in India. Before we begin the Impact Talk today with Dr. Chatterjee, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce him. Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee is widely acclaimed as the father of CSR in our country. He was instrumental in framing and issuing the CSR guidelines for public sector enterprises. He played a major role in the inclusion of Section 135 in the Companies Act of 2013 and the framing of the rules thereafter. He joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1975 and has held many distinguished positions since, including the role of the Principal Advisor in the Planning Commission. As the DG CEO of IICA, he spearheads the National Foundation for Corporate Social Responsibility and is also a supremely skilled management practitioner, theorist, and teacher who has written and lectured over many years on issues of social and sustainable development, corporate responsibility, and human resources across multiple forums. He was invited to deliver the prestigious Darbari Seth Memorial Lecture by the Energy and Resources Institute and is currently a member of the TERI Advisory Board. Currently, he heads the Anil Agarwal Foundation as its CEO and is also a member of the Governing Council of the United Nations Global Compact, India. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you, Lakshana. Thank you very much for that introduction. Very happy to be with you here on this platform and looking forward to our interaction.
Great. I think we are excitedly looking forward to it as well, sir. Starting with today's Impact Talk, my first question is, given the critical role you played in the formulation of the CSR guideline for the public sector enterprises and the inclusion of the Section 135, would love to understand a little bit of history on how it came into being from the man himself.
Yeah, actually, I would say it was pretty much accidental in some ways, because when I became secretary to the Government of India for public sector enterprises, I really had not much of a clue about CSR or what was being done across the country, who was doing what. And of course, all of us know that CSR meant different things to different people. But there was a small file on my table on accidentally one day, which had a small 2-pager on what CSR was like and whether we should try and look at the largest space for public sector enterprises on CSR. That excited my curiosity, and then of course I began to read everything I could lay my hands on CSR across the world, and most of the research on CSR had been done in America at the time, so I read up everything that I could find. But more important than that was that I then began to speak to the chiefs of the public sector undertakings and tried to bring them on board and ask them what they were doing for their CSR. And of course, all of them had different answers to the same questions. But then was there a policy, what we could do together, how could we evolve it? So we began discussing this, putting a committee together, and finally we issued the guidelines, which became effective from the 1st of April 2010. And frankly speaking, that is really the date of modern CSR in India. That was the part about the public sector.
So
then, of course, the question comes, and you would ask that, I can anticipate that question. Going from public sector, which is government. But charity begins at home. You were secretary in the public sector enterprises, so it's okay. Government issues guidelines and they're bound to follow them. What do you do for the private sector? And that became an important issue because for the private sector, guidelines won't do any good. You need to legislate. And I remember now that Corporate Affairs Ministry reached out to us and they said that, these guidelines that you have for public sector undertakings, we are now in the process of formulation of the Companies Act. Imagine it was being formulated then in
Yeah.
2010-11, and it of course became an act in 2013. So there are 470 sections in the Companies Act. We can give you one section, section 135, as it turned out to be. And can you condense all of that that's been written there into, say, 120 or 130 words? So 30, 40 pages of guidelines into just that one section. But because of that window of opportunity, we were in the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs able to frame a section, send it for legal vetting, give it to the Corporate Affairs Ministry, and finally it became part of the 2013 Act.
I think I'm getting goosebumps just hearing of how a two-page file can become such a big section and so important in the whole governance and the, Corporate Social Responsibility Act in itself. So really lovely to know the inception of how it came into being. Moving from there, just talking about, with the global economy's focus shifting to sustainable development, reducing carbon footprint, and fulfilling the whole aspects of social and environmental goals, what are the synergies you see emerging between the current CSR legislation and the emerging concept of ESG in India at present?
Okay, that needs a little bit of a detailed answer. Remember that when we framed Section 135,
Hmm.
there was no SDGs.
Correct.
What we had was the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. And you will also see that the entire legislation has no definition of CSR anywhere. And that's the peculiarity and the strength of the legislation. We don't, we ask corporates and public sector enterprises to do CSR. They have a right to ask us, all right, government says do CSR. What is CSR? Government doesn't define that anywhere. And there's a reason for not doing that because everyone's definition is different. And definitions are then subject to interpretations, by every section of the community. So all we've said there is whatever you do under Schedule 7, and Schedule 7 actually began with 12 items. Now it's about 16. Any of those activities that you perform will count as CSR. So we allowed corporates a great deal of elbow room. We allowed their boards, where the best minds of the company are located, to decide what they would want to do and then decide what to do in CSR. But you will see that even then in Schedule 7, environmental sustainability finds a place. And that is really the synergy between what we now look at as sustainable development goals. We're looking at the way sustainability in the planet happens. Much of the things that were due to come later were actually foreseen or encapsulated in Schedule 7 from then itself.
No, I think it's very enlightening for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of young professionals in the sector to look at this sort of foresight and see how MDGs into SDGs still the law is very relevant and will continue to be. Springing from there, my next question is actually again coming across from a space of ESG and CSR. Given the strong interplay between CSR and ESG, what would your advice be to leading corporates in efficiently and impactfully scaling their current strategies?
Yeah, so there's one thing that the Corporate Affairs Ministry has recently done, which is, of course, the BRRs, as they are now called. These are now being made compulsory for the top 1,000 companies in the country. And these guidelines, which have been issued by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, constitute a large part of CSR, but also a large part of ESG. So corporates are encouraged now to prepare their ESG reports They are encouraged to take a 360-degree view of the total gamut of responsibility or responsible business, as you might call it, because BRR is business responsibility report. And the idea is that CSR then becomes part of the total social responsibility. CSR, of course, is mandated, it is now, of course, mandatory, and there's a 2% requirement to spend. But beyond that, and government and the world today is moving in many ways beyond CSR. CSR is one part of the total ESG spectrum. So whether it is about reducing your carbon footprint, a reduction in the release of greenhouse gases, whatever else you're doing for the planet in terms of conservation, preservation, and so on. And then you're linking this very well, I have to say. ESG is not just about uh, the planet and planetary resources. A large part of ESG is about the governance of companies. So there is that part. And of course, the social part, and how you run the company. How do you treat your employees? What do you do for CSR? So ESG has become a very comprehensive, more 360-degree view of what companies need to do and discharge their responsibilities towards society and to the planet.
I think that's supremely helpful, and for the emerging leaders in the corporate space, I think it's become an increasing priority. In that sense, another question springing from that sort of a space is that how do you see the ESG criteria at present influence impact investment decisions and possible portfolio construction?
Again, we are at the cusp, I would say, of very important developments that are likely to unfold in the, I would not say immediate, but in the foreseeable future.
Correct.
With traditionally, when you look at investment decisions, they were always taken primarily by making a financial assessment of a company. And by saying that this company may well be in the red, but has tremendous potential for us to take it forward. If you, for example, were to try and buy Air India, why would you want to buy it? But there is a corporate decision involved there because you see potential in a company that right now is in bad shape. So most of those earlier decisions were taken on the basis of the financial performance of a company, good, bad, indifferent. The investment decision maker took a decision saying, I see potential. If I invest money here over the next 3, 4, 5 years, I will, get an ROI of so much percent. And that's how all this, fortune investing and stuff came into being. So you have this whole angel investment concept coming. But now more and more investment bankers, investors, generally speaking, are also trying to take a more 360-degree view of the company. Because if you don't do that now, you will be saddled with the damage or the what shall I say, the harm that the company is doing to the planet as a whole, for which it will be held to account willy-nilly today or tomorrow. So if you take a decision based principally or only on balance sheets, you see just 50% of the picture. And so you would remember, I mean, as a CSR practitioner, the 3 Ps. And that sort of thing is now coming more and more into assessing investment decisions based on a holistic 360-degree view of the company.
No, I think that is extremely critical to consider, not just for like investors, but also like CSR practitioners, considering how they are evolving their own approach, given the 2030 agenda and everything in the pipeline accordingly. Uh, Having said that, just wanted to understand how do you see the ESG landscape panning out in India in the coming 5 years? Let's assume.
You know, uh, just look at some companies and how much they have changed in the last few months. Let's take Vedanta, where I operate, a very, very large company operating. And they've changed their logo itself from transforming elements to transforming for good. And what do they mean by that? They have looked at what should be their commitment to the community, to the planet, and to look at it from a 360-degree perspective and say, what shall we do for each of the sectors in our company? So, transforming communities is the very first of the three pillars that Vedanta has set for itself. The second is transforming the planet, about which we spoke. And the third is transforming the workplace, which is the governance place itself. So, this is right up there in your face when you open any website or anything that the company does today. It prides itself not on saying that last year we made XYZ thousand crores of profit. What you see first is these three things coming up. So companies more and more are now branding themselves on the last quarter's financial results. The branding of companies itself has changed dramatically into what good they are doing in the ESG space. That's a huge thing.
I think we completely agree because we also notice this happening as we are evolving, and in the next 5 years, I'm looking forward to more of this coming along with some amazing, promising work supporting it. Uh, since we've spoken about the corporate side of it a lot, just wanted to understand from you on any advice that you'd give to small to mid-sized, high-caliber NGOs who can complement this vision in the coming 5 years.
One amazing development, and maybe I could dwell on this for a minute or two. When we conceived the law itself, you would see that we were looking at what we now call as a triangle, at the apex of which is the government, which is oversight and which is basically a facilitator, and of course a regulator. Can't take that away from government. But who funds CSR, who funds ESG, who funds all of this responsibility? The corporate entity. But who executes at the ground level? These NGOs, these civil society organizations. And initially, I remember that when I came up with this idea as a concept, there was tremendous amount of distrust on both sides. Corporates were livid, saying, NGOs are fly-by-night operators. They're there today, gone tomorrow. How can we possibly trust them with money, and how would they execute the programs? And the NGOs were, of course, equally dismissive of corporates as, or just to say that, how can you trust corporates? Because all they do is look after how much money they can make out of every transaction. But over these last 7 years, Lakshana, believe me, that trust deficit, as I like to call it, has been bridged hugely for the reason that the law allowed these two sectors, the corporate sector and the civil society sector, to talk to each other, to have conversations, to understand. If you're a corporate executive sitting in a multi-storied building on whichever floor, how much do you know of ground realities? And but you would want to know, right? Because it's the money that you're investing there. So if you select, or you want to, and they do now, select the best NGOs possible, the conversation begins. And today, most of the CSR programs are outcomes of conversations. And NGOs today are no longer seen as implementing agencies only. They're seen as partners in the program. So that sense of equality, that sense of being on the same platform, being on the same side, pulling in the same direction, that is the principal change that has happened.
No, I think it's also very reflective to see how these roles have changed. And we only hope they continue to change for the better with these, how a two-page concept note became a law. We hope this continues to happen and adds immense value as it has in the last couple of years. And with that, I would actually come to the end of this Impact Talk. Thank you so much for such a wonderful chat, Dr. Chatterjee. It's been very enlightening for us to actually hear it from the man himself who conceptualized this from scratch and see it evolve in our own lifetimes. And it's an absolute honor to have this interaction with you. Thank you so much for this enriching chat and joining
Thank
us
you,
here today.
Lakshana. And let me say without reservation, not just you, but CSR Box as an organization. I've been associated with CSR Box for several years now. I will not hesitate to commend all the wonderful work that you've been doing and the professionalism that you have brought into this newly created field of CSR and now in ESG. My compliments to you, to your leadership, to your organization, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much, sir. It's been very humbling for us. Thank you.